I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is the coolest band out of Detroit you haven't heard of. Unless you have. Then you're cool too. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. I'm Abby, this is my flagship series Vinyl Monday, the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If TV show length episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. What can I say? I'm everywhere these days. I'm spreading like a f***ing infection. Gangrene, if you will. Yeah. Lots happening as of late. Last week, I finally got to announce that I am on board Tracking Angle's team of writers and debuted with a Live at Pompeii review, no less. Wait, what am I doing? It's right here. What am I doing? It's right here. I have, of course, it's... Oh! A Pink Floyd at Pompeii review. In typical AD fashion, I choose the most audacious manner of announcing my presence. Over on the Dolls Pod, I interviewed Tiger Beat editor Ann Moses. It was a lot of fun hearing her stories about working for the biggest tween girl magazine in the country at the time. I remember buying Tiger Beat when I was a kid, long after her time at the magazine, but still, her legacy is worth celebrating. It was an honor to speak with her. This is such a big step for our show. Interviews were always part of Emma's vision, and I've been thrilled to make that happen for her. Ann Moses, in her own words, get it? Like the Tiger Beat profiles? Anyway, is available wherever you stream your podcasts, but as always, Apple and Spotify are linked in the description. I made my kazoo playing debut last week as well. I don't see that happening ever again. This week, I get to give you one of the videos I've wanted to make since I first started posting to YouTube 3 years ago yesterday. It's been a long, strange trip, as they say, from one-off vinyl collection video to an extension of Instagram clips I made post-graduation to the thing that kicked off my career as... Dude, I don't even know what you'd call me. YouTuber is reductive, blogger isn't accurate either, influencer definitely not, journalist, rock historian, no, my degree's not in that. I'm just kinda here. All roads lead back to Detroit, it seems. This week's album is... The Power of Zeus, The Gospel According to Zeus. Congrats if you somehow guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my post tab. That's where I post hints to what the next album is going to be. I make announcements, I host polls. You can find all of that on my channel, and if you so choose, you can always read the written versions of my reviews on my website, linked in the description. Everything is in the description. All right, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is clearly a repress. Originals of the Gospel run for like $200. Vinyl Monday does not rock with that kind of budget. I know there was a UK Record Store Day 2019 release of this album, though this is from 2019, this is not that, and this beauty turned up in my P.O. box. I spoke about Power of Zeus in a few past videos. I might have mentioned them in that initial vinyl collection video. I know I mentioned them in the Peraino episode because these guys are quite Sabbathy. I expressed that The Gospel was one of my white whale records, and one of my kind subscribers just took matters into their own hands and ended the search for me. So thank you, kind subscriber, for in part making this episode possible. Now let's talk about this cover art. This is a crazy photo of the band with the colors inverted and tinted in orange and brown. The hand-drawn logo invokes Greco-Roman architecture with these swirls at the top of the P and in the Z. It's kind of giving 20th Century Fox vibes as well. The guys are long-haired and shirtless or otherwise in ponchos. If 1970 was an album cover, it would be this. The Gospel cover was photographed by Jim Wilson, Power of Zeus's manager at the time. He used something called a reverse infrared technique. To me, it looks a lot like solarization. He also took this photo in consideration for the cover, but the label deemed it a little too out there. On the back cover, is an abstract illustration and poem by Evelyn Miles, Jim's girlfriend at the time. From Ralph Tarana in a 22-year-old forum post, Evelyn, quote, was an extremely beautiful and talented hippie chick who drove the Motown art department crazy because they claimed she was taking too much time to complete the work. I remember I had to go down there and smooth those guys out a little, and it all got completed on time. The Power of Zeus lineup consisted of guitarist and lead singer Joe Peraino, Dennis Weber on keys, Bill Jones on bass, and Bob Mikulski on drums. The Gospel According to Zeus was produced by Russ and Ralph Tarana of the Sunliners, who became Rare Earth, roll transition. I've never done that with 2 albums before. I did not know how it would work. This is why I don't like filming on Fridays. Gotta wait for the garbage trucks to go by. So, judging by the fact that I cited a 22-year-old forum post, where most of it is people making plans to hang, there is very, very little substantial information out there about Power of Zeus. That's why it took so long for this episode to happen. In order for a story chapter of this episode to be possible, I'd have to have an interview. Thanks to Chris, I had a contact. I hastily set up an interview, prepared questions, sent along examples of my work because I have that now, and all of 45 minutes after I finished filming the new Basement Tapes video, I got to speak with Power of Zeus guitarist and frontman Joe Peraino. Thinking back to the records you were listening to as a kid growing up in Detroit, what music were you hearing a lot?
As a kid, the 50s and 60s, probably the 50s, which would have been the doo-wop groups. So it'd be a lot of black artists that were doing most of the big hits at the time. That was probably my major group of listening records. And my dad was a big collector, and he collected everything from country to opera to rock and roll. So it was kind of like the beginning of rock and roll really taking off as I was growing up. And I pretty much listened to everything from Bill Haley in the Comets to, whoever was the big artist at that time.
And once rock and roll hit, what guitar players did you gravitate towards?
Well, back in the early days, like Link Wray was one of the first guys to use distortion. And I really enjoyed that kind of guitar playing. And then some of the stuff the blues artists played was really interesting. But mainly I was listening to the rock and roll guitar players, like Chuck Berry and that type of artist at the time. Let's see. I went in the Marine Corps when I was 17. And that's where I learned how to play. I was self-taught. I played guitar. I started playing guitar in 1963 when I went in the Marine Corps.
What kind of stuff was on the radio when you were in the barracks with the guys?
In 63, that was right at the beginning of the Beatles and the English artists coming in. In fact, I would be laying in my bunk listening to the Four Seasons versus a song by the Beatles or something, somebody like that, or some Kinks. But I really got into surf music because I was in Southern California in San Diego. That was my first guitar. I bought a Fender Jaguar. Very interesting. And I had a Fender Jazzmaster. And I started playing surf music. And then as I progressed, and the Beatles and everybody else started coming in, and we started playing more rock and roll. As I progressed into the rock and roll situation, I got into the more heavier bands. That was more of my favorite bands, like Black Sabbath.
What of guitar playing did you pick up from the guys in the Marines with you?
Well, it was quite a diverse bunch of people in there because there was, Mexicans and played Mexican music, country guys who were playing the country guitar, jazz players playing jazz. So I picked a little bit of everything. So I could play a little jazz, a little country, and then I found a couple of guys that were really into the rock, and then we started playing, the rock and roll stuff. And then I got a band started, and when I was in the Marine Corps, we would play off and on the bases, Friday and Saturday nights. So I played mainly pretty much what was on the radio at the time, for dance, kind of dance club stuff.
Now, tell me a little bit about your pre-Power of Zeus groups.
That's an interesting situation. I played in the Marine Corps and we played bars and we played these, I guess you would call them areas on the base, like they'd have Area 53 or whatever it was, Area 47.
Mhm.
And each one had an enlisted man's club, and we would play in one club on one day, another club. It was a very large base. They probably had about 10 different clubs that you could play throughout the entire Camp Pendleton. And I started playing there. And then there was a Mexican bass player we picked up, and he would get bars downtown San Diego.
Ah,
So we would go downtown San Diego. I was still in the Marine Corps, and we would play those type of bars. Basically, I played guitar throughout the last 3 years in the Marine Corps. And then I came back to Michigan in 1967, and I basically stopped playing guitar. And I was working at Chrysler's stamping plant, which is a plant in Michigan, and I met a guy there, and he was starting up a band, and he heard I play guitar, and I put a band together with him, and he was the band leader, and I was rhythm guitar. So I played rhythm guitar with that particular group, and I much didn't care for his leadership or the song selection he picked.
what kind of songs were you stuck with in the old group?
In his group, the songs he called, they were like pretty much what was on the charts, but they were kind of schmaltzy stuff, you know.
Mhm.
I can't even remember the names now. It was so long ago, but and I didn't like the way he called the songs off, you know, what song, because you were playing basically to get people to dance at that time, and he would just you get them all on a dance floor and you pick a song that was like totally non-danceable, you know.
Mhm.
So that's when I started looking for musicians to put a band together with. And I ran an ad in the paper and I found Bill Jones, which is the original bass player who's still alive with the Power of Zeus. He came to practice, and he was with a big band in South Carolina that had like a seven state TV program that was broadcast in about 7 different areas. We put a band together and started playing in a bar in downtown Detroit.
You found Bill, and then how did the rest of the Power of Zeus come together?
Well, basically, we started out as a trio. Bill found a job playing in a very hardcore country bar in downtown Detroit. I mean, in a very rough section of Detroit. And it was called the Jerry Michaels Band. And Jerry Michaels was a drummer, and he had been in this location as a house band for about a year and a half. And Bill invited me down to see him after I was working at the Chrysler's on a Friday night. And I brought the guitar down there and sat in. And Jerry Michaels liked the way I play guitar because I was playing. They played hardcore country, okay, like Chet Atkins. I don't know if you're familiar with that guitar player, but that kind of style. I didn't know anything, and I was basically a rhythm guitar. And Bill would yell out the chords to me because Bill played guitar and bass. So he'd say, you know, C, F minor, G, and I'd strum along, and the other guitar player would play all the rest of the stuff because he was a country guitar player. So, make a long story short, they end up liking the style. We played better. We end up taking over the job. I found a drummer, and we went in there as a trio. So it was a guy named Randy Clements before Bob Mahowski, our original Power Zeus drummer. Denny Weber came at a later time. So we got this job. It was a bar called the Wooden Nickel, and it was downtown on Jefferson in downtown Detroit, Jefferson and Mount Elliott. We took over the bar. I bought in like 27 black lights and had, you know, all of the whatever they call it, day glow paints, and we had tulips with blood dripping out of them, and it was the big hippie era. And turned the bar into a rock and roll bar. That people would come up and they'd go, "Man, play that song that sounds like a train's coming through the building." And Jones had a fuzz tone on his bass, and it would feed back so loud, it's unbelievable. It was a lot of fun. We were in the bar, and that was our home base until we cut the album. Then we started moving around a little bit, started building a following, and Motown heard about us and came out to see us, and that's how we got signed.
So there's a lot of lore and myths swirling around about you guys' band name, and there's one thing I'd like cleared up if you could. The name is written on, it's the booklet in here, maybe it's the back, it's definitely the booklet. Was your band name ever Gangrene?
Yes, it was.
Do you remember who changed the name?
Well, originally I named it Gangrene, music to
Mm,
infect your mind and body. We
very psychedelic.
Yeah, very psyched. And we couldn't really get any jobs with that name. Like the booking agents were afraid to book us with the name. So we had the
It's like,
house band over at,
well, what are these guys about?
yeah, we had the house band at the Wood Nichols, so we didn't really care. When we went to Motown and they bought us into Motown, they didn't think the name was commercial enough, you know. So somebody between our manager, which was a guy named Jim Wilson, who came in and signed the band, and after Motown got interested, between him and the people at Motown, they came up with the name. How they did that, I don't know.
Thanks for clearing that up. I was curious about that.
Yeah, a lot
What
of people ask about that.
what were the band dynamics like once it was a four piece and you were working that way?
I was a former Marine, so I basically kind of ruled the band with an iron fist, kind of, you say. I set up the equipment, I set the practices up, I picked the songs. Pretty much me and Bill Jones were kind of co-leaders. And Denny Weber came in last, and the drummer, Bob Mahowski, was a phenomenal drummer. He had the biggest drums you ever seen in your life. I mean, they were like cannons. The bass drum. If you stood out in front of the drum, it would ruffle your shirt.
Like you needed to put a brick in front of it so that when he was playing, it wouldn't slide forward. That much
Yeah,
power.
I think he nailed them down to the floor, really. But it was I don't know what the size it was, but it was massive. And he also had the biggest cymbals you ever saw. When he changed cymbals, we had like strobe lights in this bar, and he would go in a drum solo, and the bass player would go into a feedback with the bass, and I would take this little cymbal, a ride cymbal about that big, and the ceiling was probably a 25-foot ceiling. It was an old bar with angels, which was tin pressed in the ceiling. Okay, the light be flashing, and I would take that little cymbal and I would flip it all the way up in the air, and you could see all these guys, all these druggies and everybody. And we would get lawyers and nurses and businessmen, they would just sit there and you'd see them go up in the air, watch it, and then watch come down. And I would work up to the biggest cymbal. And I'd take the biggest cymbal and I'd flip this. And this thing was, I'm not exaggerating, probably that big around. And I would flip it up in the air and I would watch the crowd. And they just go like that. And I'm looking at the crowd and I look over here in the corner, and there's two guys sitting there and one guy laying on the floor who evidently must have passed out or whatever. I don't know. As I take the last one, I see him over there and I flip it up in the air, it goes up, and I'm watching these guys and they look at it go down, and the guy taps the other guy on the shoulder and he points to the guy laying on the ground and he goes, and he's looking up in the air for the next. It was hilarious. They didn't even do nothing to pick the guy up. It was pretty crazy. Bill Jones was like a co-leader, basically, as far as having it together. And Bob was phenomenal drummer, but had a little bit of a problem with drugs, and so did Denny. So they both kind of hung out together, and me and Bill Jones more basically hung out. We did most of the writing, and then Bob did the one song. But we gave some of the writing to some of the guys, just to be fair. We basically got along pretty good.
What kind of records were you listening to by the time Power of Zeus took shape?
Pretty much all the heavy stuff, all the heavy guitar players, the standard main guitar players, Hendrix, Clapton, the guy from Blood Rock, the guy from pretty much the top hardcore rock guitar players. The guy from Black Sabbath. Those were Jimmy Page, most of the mainstream guys, because being that we were in the bar, we were playing a lot of their stuff. We played a lot of our own originals, but we would play a lot of, it would be right off the album, like Good Times, Bad Times, and, Communication Breakdown. All of the different albums that were popular at the time, we take, one of the songs that were on there that was the big song, and then we play that song. We were really, really loud. The bass player had a double stack, and I had a big Marshall set up, and it wasn't that small of a bar, but we were a very loud, hardcore rock band at the time.
By the time you were gearing up to make this record, what was your rig looking like now? What instruments, what effects pedals? You mentioned a Marshall stack.
Oh yeah, I really didn't get too much into the pedals on a wah-wah pedal. The way my amp was set up, I had a Fender amp hooked up that was a different ohm for the speakers, so I got a real clean with a little bit of distortion, and I pretty much played clean right through that whole thing with a little bit of distortion on that. And when I went to the studio, I got a smaller amp to get the sound I got in the studio. It was a small Princeton Reverb, which was the original amp I bought in 1963. So I recorded on that, and I think I used a distortion pedal on one. Like I didn't have a whole bunch of pedals like you see. And a wah-wah pedal live, that was it. And then in the studio, I wanted to get a little more distortion. I think I used that there, but very seldom did I use anything else live. I sold my Fender guitar for a Les Paul, and then I went and got a Gibson SG. I think I played the S, and then I had a Flying V. I think that I'm pretty sure that I played the SG on most of that album.
How did you build up your lead playing from being a rhythm player in your old group to the lead guitarist here?
That's really a good question. It was one of those things where I pretty much had to, because after I quit the band where I was playing rhythm guitar and I wanted to start the band, and I was the only guitar player in the band. In fact, when I cut that album, I don't think I was playing lead much more than about a year, maybe a year and a half. I just play and play and play. That's all I did, is I play for 4 or 5 hours. And I was never great at copying somebody else, like taking Jeff Beck or Hendrix or somebody and playing it exactly like that. But I would create my own leads out of my own knowledge of what I had of the keyboard and what I heard in my ear on whatever the drummer or the bass player was doing. So it worked out pretty good, because we were a three-piece for quite a while, and you have to do a lot of work as a trio. And we played 5 nights a week, so it gave me a lot of practice. In fact, because we had so much freedom in this bar, the first song was a jam tune that the bass player or the drummer would start a groove, and we would play for 45 minutes straight without stopping. And then we go and we would play the recorded material, the copy tunes. But we literally played 45, 50 minutes nonstop. And we had, like, that second album that you had, there were some tapes that were recorded in that location at the downtown bar that we played in, the Wood Nickel. And there was a jam on that. I don't think the fidelity was good enough to do it, but it was kind of like a Clapton thing where they jam. I don't know if you some of the Clapton stuff where they jam, or a Jeff Beck tune. And it was 45 minutes of different patterns and different beats. It was really, really good. I was kind of bummed that they couldn't get that off there.
It took everything in me not to go asking Joe about the 5. My Rob Tyner's MC5 poster was right there. My Yardbirds MC5 Gary Grimshaw print is right there. But this is a Power of Zeus episode. I wanted to honor Power of Zeus, but I had good reason to ask Joe about another Detroit band. I believe your brother was in the Up?
Yeah, my brother was in the Up, and he also played with Arthur Brown. I Am the God of Hellfire. And I bring you fire. He spent a lot of time in England, and that might be something you might be interested in. He later, after the Arthur Brown thing, came out with his own thing called Victor Peraino's Kingdom Come, which is a really heavy bootlegged album right now all over the place. Did really well in his own. In fact, he went back, I think he recorded some more stuff with Arthur Brown here.
That's super cool. From someone on the inside of it, what was the Detroit music scene in the late 60s like?
Oh, massive. I mean, there were probably 4 concert halls, so many bands that were Detroit bands that were really big in Detroit, and some that had made it out of Detroit, but it was a very, very strong music scene with a lot of good guitar players. It was Hippiesville with concerts in the parks, and they had 4 major auditoriums. And the Amboy Dukes were real big at the time, and it was a pretty amazing place to be. I mean, Detroit's always been a music force in the rock and roll industry, and pretty much every style of music come out of Detroit.
What was it about Detroit that produced so many groups bearing what people might call a heavy sound?
It was just a factory town, and most people, it was a hardcore, kind of a hardcore sound that came out of here. And there were a lot of people that took the lead in Detroit that were very strong guitar players, like the MC5 was really big. And, that kind of powerhouse group was just synonymous with the Detroit stuff. Everything was pretty heavy, loud and heavy. You're doing a really good job. I don't know where you come up. You got some great questions. I don't know where you can
Thank
get
you.
up.
Since you brought up the five, did you ever find yourself at the Grandy Ballroom?
Oh yeah, I played the Grandy Ballroom.
You guys did.
And we played the Grandy Ballroom in the Easttown Theater. And the MC5, well, my brother was in the Up, and that was the opening band for the MC5. So John Sinclair at the time, they used to have a place in downtown Detroit called the Castle. They moved from the Castle to Ann Arbor. But John Sinclair, and I would go see the band pretty much every week because my brother was the opening act. Because John Sinclair had a brother named Dave Sinclair, and Dave Sinclair managed my brother's band, the Up, and John Sinclair managed, the MC5. I knew all the guys in the band. It was a pretty exciting time.
Yeah, Motown, you mentioned briefly, it cast a long musical shadow over Detroit. Why
Right.
do you think American audiences in the 60s received Motown so warmly?
Motown was well, first of all, they had the hits. They could write, they had writers that could write hits, and the hits were always on the radio. So anytime you turn the radio on, it was a good groove, a good beat. They recorded the song so that they really cut through. They had just a tremendous amount of talent and a tremendous amount of sound coming out of different people. I mean, from the Marmalettes to Marvin Gaye to whatever. And their studio reproduction of the sound and their musicianship was pretty astounding. And they were the right sound at the right time. It was something that actually appealed to the older adults and actually appealed to the younger crowd too, because the acts were, had a youth orientated look about them. Mm-hmm. And I worked at Motown for about a year and a half. I was A&R with the main guy that was the hit picker for Motown, which was a gentleman by the name of Harry Bulk. He was the head of the A&R department. And with the Power Zeus broke up, I became Harry Bulk's assistant. And everything that went through Motown from about 1971, 72, right in that 73 area, went through my desk. I A-B'd all the acetates, and I would give him the best two mixes for those songs. And then Harry would pick one of the best two mixes. I had my own office on the 5th floor. So it was a pretty exciting time. I went to California with Motown. When they went to California for a while, they wanted me to move out there.
What were the most memorable singles that came across your desk while you were at Motown?
Oh, Papa Was a Rolling Stone. Papa was a rolling stone, yeah. Norman Whitfield wrote all of the Temptations and quite a few of the other ones. He was a writer and a producer. And he came into my office one day and he was tapping out a beat on his leg. He said, "Listen to this song." He was playing me an acetate, which was only the rhythm section, because in the studio, they would cut the rhythm section first, and then the singers would come in and overdub over the top. And he started tapping his foot, and he's tapping his foot. Papa was a rolling. He started singing it to me right there. And then 2 weeks later, I was on the road with David Ruffin in Atlanta, Georgia, driving across town, and that came on the radio, which was 2 weeks after I heard it. It was at that time I was on the road with David.
Pulling back in the timeline a little bit, still in the Motown days, but when you were in act with them, what do you remember of the recording process of The Gospel According to Zeus?
That's interesting because Motown really was, kind of an R&B studio. It was set up for this. They had, strings and, that kind of instrumentation and basically funky rhythm guitar sounds. You didn't hear any kind of, sounds coming out like, Jeff Beck or, that style of guitar playing. And at the time, people were recording in like studios in New York and in England and all over. And they were producing really, really big sound. That studio was not capable of producing the impact of the sound. Like if you listen to a record that's like a Led Zeppelin record or a Jeff Beck record, it's got a lot more depth to it, and they didn't have the ability to. They never knew they had little drums you recorded on different kind of. It was a whole different kind of sound that they got. So we had a kind of a rough time. Ralph and Russ Tarana were the producers for that album, the Power of Zeus album, and they did a good job. But there was only so much they could do technically with the acoustics of the room and what kind of reverbs they used and effects they had. So it was kind of tough, and they didn't have. It wasn't a real big studio where you could, put the drums in a big cage like if you see now and when they record in the larger groups, the heavy rock groups. When we did it, we had to go behind a wall and put up a wall and kind of play. But it was a little tough, but it came out. It came out okay.
I'm sure you've been asked about the Sorcerer of Isis before. It's the one everyone sampled, but I'm going to ask you first about a song that you wrote, The Death Trip. What influenced that?
I don't know. Maybe it was all the drugs that we had at that time. Probably too much mescaline or whatever it is. It just come to me, and I just was in one of those, kind of all by myself playing, and the lights were pretty dim low, and it's kind of spooky, and I just started writing that. But the Sorcerer was a groove that got sampled. It was our manager took us up north for 2 weeks, and we wrote all the songs. I think we might have had 2 songs written that were good enough to record, and then we went there, and most of the songs were written in 2 weeks, kind of woodshedding. And that the one song that you mentioned was just a song the drummer started out with a groove, and then Bill Jones came in with the bass and I came in with the guitar, and it just all came together, and we wrote it right there, and we had a recording of it. They were taping it, our manager, and then we just put it together, went in the studio and cut it.
I'd also like to ask you a song. I think your bassist wrote this one. It's another longtime favorite of mine. It kicks off the record, It Couldn't Be Me.
Oh, yeah.
How does a riff like that happen?
That's one of my favorite songs. And when we played live, because the impact of the Motown studios really didn't capture, they wanted to commercialize this a little bit because they wanted to get airplay. But live, we were like 12 times heavier than, it really comes off on. You really got to crank that album to get the actual fidelity out of it. That was a song that Bill Jones wrote, and me and him just started working on it, and he had the beginning of the groove and all the lyrics. So he showed me the song, and then I put the lead together for it. And that's probably my favorite song on the album.
And there's kind of an oddball tune I was curious about. It's on that same side of the record, Green Grass and Clover.
Grass and clover.
It's so different from everything else there.
That's another Bill Jones. That was kind of Bill Jones's real personality. Even though you can see the difference in his writing, where he wrote It Couldn't Be Me, and then turned around and wrote Green Grass and Clover. Probably at different times in his musical career that he did that. It's too bad I couldn't have got a hold of him to be on the interview too.
The track listing of The Gospel According to Zeus goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have It Couldn't Be Me, followed by In the Night. Then Green Grass and Clover. Next, I Lost My Love, and side 1 closes with The Death Trip. Opening up side 2, we have No Time, followed by Uncertain Destination. Then Realization. Next, Hardworking Man, and the album closes with The Sorcerer of Isis, with the subtitle The Ritual of the Mole. The Gospel According to Zeus was released in 1970, and it didn't really go anywhere. Turns out, Motown had no idea how to promote a rock and roll band. Who would have thought? An agency in New York actually expressed interest in the guys, but Motown put the kibosh on that. Power of Zeus opened for Traffic, Procol Harum, fellow Detroiters Alice Cooper. They even appeared on TV in Montreal sometime during their tour.
You wouldn't happen to remember what that show was called, would you?
I don't. I think Adam knew the name of the show, and he called one of the producers, and they never kept anything. It was all cut on something different, but it was, in fact, we were on the show, and so was Stevie Wonder. Because a friend of mine in California that I was in the Marine Corps with called me up and seen it on his TV and called me and tell me about it. And he said, you guys were the headline of the show, and Stevie Wonder was like a little peon. And I said, really? He goes, yeah, they were like really into the rock and roll, and they just kind of, so that was kind of news to me. Because Stevie was the biggest thing I ever thought. We played 2 big segments of the show, and they had it staged on like different heights and stuff.
Yeah.
It was kind of pretty cool.
Do you remember what numbers you played?
Probably It Couldn't Be Me was one of them, but probably the top, whatever they requested us to play, but I think we played It Couldn't Be Me for sure. I'm not sure if we had a pantomime to that or not. I don't remember. In the day, that's what they did. You played along to the record because they didn't have the studio quality to reproduce the sound live.
What kind of clubs did you play on that tour?
It was basically like rock and roll clubs, like a small concert, like a small concert club. Wasn't quite as crazy as being on the road with David Ruffin, but I could write a book on that one.
Unless somebody has it taped in their attic somewhere, it's lost media. Power of Zeus dissolved about a year after the Gospel's release. Personal relationships were on the fray, and there was no money with which to live, making this the only thing Power of Zeus put out besides the Hardworking Man single backed with Realization. Until last year. In the time between the Gospel's release and now, something interesting happened. The Gospel became something of a cult favorite in Detroit's underground. Then, sometime in the 90s, producers discovered The Sorcerer of Isis. If you think you've heard that drum break before, it's because you probably have. Its earliest known use was in 1993. Common sampled it in 94. Cypress Hill sampled it twice. But Sorcerer really took off when it was sampled by a certain fellow Detroit native. About a decade after that, Jay-Z and disgraced philosopher Kanye West used it on their collab album. And the rest is hip-hop history. The Sorcerer of Isis has been sampled 93 known times, and there's probably more.
What do you think of the hip-hop community finding your stuff and sampling it?
That's great. We owe a lot to the hip-hop community. In fact, there was I can't think of his name right now, but there's a DJ hip-hop guy did a interview like this. I don't know, you can probably look it up somewhere. But he was a black gentleman that was maybe in his late 30s, 40s, right in there. After the interview, I said, let me ask you a question. How did all these black guys get into a white 60s hippie group and start listening to it and doing it? He says, well, there was a hip hop guy that went to a hip hop convention and had sampled one of the songs on there. And he got a minor hit out of it. So it really, really sounded good. And everybody wanted to know who it was, and he didn't want to tell nobody. So after a while, I guess it came out, and they found the album, and then they all started sampling it, And I said, man, I just find that so hard to believe, they got into this, hippie thing. And he said, oh man, once they get into that album, he goes, they love you guys. He goes, My favorite song is Uncertain Destination and, In the Night or something. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, because it was so, so straight ahead white. But he said, no, man, we love you guys. I wanted you to say one thing. Want you to thank all the hip hop guys that for making that album what it is.
Are there any plans to bring the Gospel According to Zeus to streaming services?
I don't know. I know that that Adam is working on a distribution deal, but I'm not sure if he's got any plans for that at all.
This is kind of a long red situation. Unfortunately, Power of Zeus's pockets were not lined as mountains were. In that time, both Bob and Denny had passed away.
I got my first royalty from that second album that they cut out. I never made a penny off the Power of Zeus, Gospel According to Zeus.
Why not?
Because the record company is pretty corrupt. And I got a lawyer, and the lawyer said, I'll tell you right off the bat, chasing that is like really tough. I would want $10,000 down and about probably another $10,000 after that. And I can't guarantee I'll collect a penny. So it's like the gentleman that owns the second album is a real straight guy, Adam. I think he's going to help me see if we can get anything out of it. 56 years later, maybe we can get some interest on it.
That would be great. The Gospel has been reissued a handful of times, but Ancient Greece recently released that LP, the new one.
B-roll Abby will show you right about now. It's on this sick red and orange marble vinyl.
How did Uncertain Destination come to be?
Adam basically called me on the phone and said, man, I've been searching you for a long time. Finally got a hold of you. He said, man, I'd really like to do something with you. He said, you have anything in the can, that Motown hadn't recorded or, that you have? Well, I had a 1/4-inch track tape, a reel-to-reel tape that I had kept that was from the in the wood nickel. I think my manager actually records. So it's a recorded in the bar on a single 2-track tape with one mic in front of the band. And it came out really good because the acoustics in the bar are really good. When we heard the tape, it was the first time we really actually heard ourselves. We thought, oh man, that sounds pretty good. And it sat there for since 1970. And I would look at that tape every day, and my tape recorder stopped working. And I thought, I'm going to throw that thing away. I've never done anything with it. It just sits there for all that time. And he calls me about 5 or 6 months later. And I said, man, if you'd called me 6 months earlier, I had a tape full of stuff, all kind of different material. And I had just moved into a new house, and I had a lot of stuff I had to unpack. He said, look around. You might have something you didn't think about. And get back with me if you can find something. So sure enough, I went through all these old boxes I had, and I found a copy that said Gangrene, wooden nickel, copy, send to Denny Weber. And Denny Weber had passed on, and I had that tape. So I sent him that tape. I actually found the tape. And so he started working on that album with that tape. And I was cleaning my closet out one day, and lo and behold, I found the original tape slid behind the thing, which I thought I threw away. And I found the tape buried under a bunch of junk that I just threw down there. And I sent him that tape.
I won't be talking about Uncertain Destination much outside of its connection to the gospel, but it's really cool to hear some of this material in its embryonic state. It is mostly covers, seeing as this was a house band. Every band starts out as a really great cover band. But if you want to hear the Power of Zeus sound that Motown just could not capture, Uncertain Destination is it. That's what I think of this album, but what do I think of this album? What do I think of The Gospel According to Zeus? I believe that in life you are already tied to what you're supposed to have. It may take a while for that thing to come to you, but it is on its way. And looking back through your life, once you're connected to that place, that thing, that person that you're supposed to be connected to, you'll see all of the little things that hinted at it. This happens to me a lot with people. Back when I was in high school, I took the SATs 2 towns over, but somehow wound up in the same room my future best friend from college was in. Then I met our 2 best friends in an elevator 2 years before we actually met. This time, it happened with music. Many, many moons ago, I had this boyfriend in LA. He was a photographer, real talented guy, and he'd set his psychedelic light show films to music. He found a copy of the gospel at some, fair or something in LA sometime before we met, and he set one of his films to It Couldn't Be Me. I kept that love for this album long after that relationship ended. I got my own copy down the line, knew this was on Rare Earth Records, but didn't really look into it. Imagine my surprise when I finally put 2 and 2 together. Took me an embarrassingly long time to work this out, that Rare Earth was Motown, which means I found a Detroit band, Power of Zeus, 6 whole months before I discovered the 5. The love of this sound opened me up to them. They would become my favorite band, and I made this crazy 3-hour project on them, and the rest is Vinyl Monday history. Prepare yourselves. The word heavy will probably be overused in this review. Looking at this track listing, It Couldn't Be Me was the obvious choice for opener. I will never forget the first time I heard it on my own outside that psychedelic film. I found this full album upload somewhere on YouTube, and there was a couple seconds of silence before the song actually began. So I'm sitting there in this couple seconds of silence, and then, to paraphrase the boss talking about like a Rolling Stone, it was like someone kicked the freaking door down. It Couldn't Be Me is bold, hard psych rock with a simple, no-nonsense riff for the rest of the song to form itself around. And a good opening track for the band's discography, too. I talk about Schizoid Man a lot. I don't talk about Good Times, Bad Times as much as I should. I don't talk very much about debut album openings on this channel because A, I don't cover many debut albums, and B, frankly, not every debut album hits. Not every band is capable of delivering a career mission statement. Power of Zeus is, though. All I want is what's mine, I don't care who I hurt. We are a band named after the king of the Greek gods, and we are hurtling our thunderbolt at you! I was shocked to learn Joe hadn't been playing lead for very long at all before the gospel was recorded. Maybe 2 years? I've always thought this solo was perfectly structured. As a guitarist, a soloist especially, you're always thinking ahead of your hands. It's like driving, right? Only look to the end of the hood and you are going to veer off the road. To trust your head, to think ahead of your hands, and trust your hands not to jump the gun, be thinking on your feet and keep that going for a whole minute through a full cycle of verse and chorus like It Couldn't Be Me does, that's not easy. Clearly, Power of Zeus wore their influences on their sleeve. I was not surprised to hear Cream on Joe's shortlist. Detroit loved Cream, and Cream loved them back. They gave arguably their greatest performance ever at the Grandie. But I hear Cream most in Bill's playing. He lifted Jack's playing style, rooted in jazz, but filtered it through something distinctly Detroit. Where Cream was the 60s power trio, Power of Zeus fell in the 70s tradition of the power 4-piece. It doesn't have the same ring to it, but it works. Case and point, Mountain, who made the same choice as Power of Zeus, organ as the 4th piece. The organ is central to moving It Couldn't Be Me, as are the drums. A band is only as good as their drummer, and Bob was phenomenal. Oh my god, there's cowbell too. Of course, there's cowbell too. If I had a nickel for every time I covered an artist whose opening track of their album, which I was covering on Vinyl Monday, had a cowbell in it, and the album art was also orange, and I happened to interview a surviving member of the band for that Vinyl Monday, I'd have 2 nickels. And if I had a nickel for every time an extremely specific situation like this somehow replicated itself on Vinyl Monday, I'd be a very rich woman. It Couldn't Be Me is arguably the best built track on the gospel. What a lot of heavy bands miss out on by nature of their craft is the art of negative space. What's not there is just as important as what is. In the Night's intro uses negative space to cast a tonal shadow out. We've experienced the liquid light show, now we walk down the long blacklit corridor. Here comes the night, dark and cold. Here comes the night where the devil takes hold. It's fascinating to me how the environment alters the music that comes out of it. Laurel Canyon in the mid to late 60s, perfect for folk. The New York Artists Underground made the Velvet Underground. And industrial cities on both sides of the pond contributed essential DNA to punk and the sound that we might call doom metal today. In moments like these, when I was a boy, it was told unto me, power of Zeus are contemporaneous to Sabbath. But then, Motown-inspired group vocals, not unlike something the Temptations would have been doing at the time, boot in the night into a blues-inspired groove. It's a lot more 60s now thanks to the tambourine. It wouldn't be too far out of place at the whiskey. Bill brought Greengrass and Clover in. It's the oddball of the album for sure. It's not dated for the time, but compared to the other sounds of this LP, the harpsichord, soft, pretty acoustic guitar part, and I think timpani thanks to Motown's facilities, they read as quite dated. How we went from Detroit to Canterbury is beyond me. The gospel's weak spot is its lyrics, a typical and forgivable offense for album number 1. Oftentimes through the first, a band is transitioning from being a really good cover band to their own sound. This pitfall is glaringly apparent on the slower numbers like Green Grass. It's up to you, to me, and understand if we can, man. I Lost My Love is a 2 minutes and change, no frills rocker you could very much picture as a house band staple. Girl, you're the one that I love. Love is a thing that I need. Power of Zeus's Detroit roots grow up out of the ground once again. That rhythm part is all funk. There's cool stuff happening with the production here, with rhythm guitar panning from one channel to the other through the rhythm section break. Otherwise, I Lost My Love is pretty interchangeable. Nothing groundbreaking happening, and what the fuck was that? We are sucked backwards with reverse group vocals singing Amen, and we're spit out into the death trip. And then it occurred to me, oh my god, this was intentional. I Lost My Love is meant to lull us into a false sense of security so Death Trip can have maximum impact. This is why we pay attention to sequencing choices. It completely takes you by surprise. Like Dropping Dead. I was just going about my groovin' day, writing this groovy song for my groovy lady, and then I died. Of course, I love Death Trip. It's big, unabashedly dramatic, with sturdy drumming, freaky and esoteric in that way only the late 60s could be. Plenty of group vocals swirl like souls in the river Styx. It's even a bit progressive. Slowly, the guitar morphs into the shape the backing vocals were in, putting lead shoes on that endless drag down that the lyrics describe. It makes space for a wonderful organ solo from Denny, until it reaches the depths. The song comes back to waltz time, the sound lightens up as the soul rises to nirvana, guided to the heavens. Follow me into the sunshine and I will show you the way. It builds into a fervent frenzy through Joe's wailing. This is, I think, his best vocal performance on the album and a perfect exercise scream. And there's another nod to Sabbath with the rainstorm and bells. Little excerpt from the poem for you. This is my sacrifice and my struggle, that of creation. That is the lifeblood I give to you. Not my possessions, that is no sacrifice. Not my love, not my time, not my body or mind or soul or even my life. These are all too easy for me to give. My sacrifice is the hell I go through. To get to heaven, you have to go through hell first. Opening up side 2 is No Time and its pagey riff. It brings the energy back to psych rock, but with a slightly different, more dramatic flavor. It's given an extra minute or 2 of runtime to develop and blends piano with organ. It gives it a certain flair Sabbath wouldn't get to for another couple years. I heard the harpsichord again at the beginning of Uncertain Destination, and I got worried. Thankfully, there's an effort to blend it with what Power of Zeus already had instead of trying to reorient themselves around this instrument. Power of Zeus has proven most successful on 2 fronts so far: the blazing hot, assertive rocker, and the progressive, doomed, dark, extended trip. For whatever reason, the folksy thing just didn't work for them the way it could for other heavy bands. It does work when it's blended with something Power of Zeus does well, like tumbling drums and a prominent bass line. The melody on I Don't Know just works so well with the chanting backing vocals. Then they come back together to mirror the motif played on guitar a couple movements back. I should have made note this one is slightly progressive too. Power of Zeus were also pretty good at writing about death and ideas of the afterlife, however esoteric and loose they are. It fits with their mythology-themed name. Clearly, being holed up in that cabin got the guys thinking of these concepts. Uncertain Destination is about a Cain-like figure whose soul is condemned to walking the earth endlessly. Uncertain Destination has the room to make this journey. It's one of the 3 long ones on the gospel. It transitions through different movements, comes back to others, as if wandering the same globe endlessly. Another well-structured guitar solo from Joe, making the most of the notes and its place in the song, headed into the big finishes Power of Zeus seem to be prone to. Realization and Hardworking Man are the weak points on the gospel. Power of Zeus seem to have stumbled on side 2. Realization's got very of its time harmonies, not in a good way or in a way that the music can elaborate upon, so it digs itself out of the ditch of cliche. Great solo though, energized with the most aggressive guitar tone and attack on the album. Bill gets to do the Jack Bruce, I'm soloing under the solo thing. Oh my god, it's In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. Bill is a hair's width away from it. I really wish I got to ask him if that was intentional. I can't remember if Iron Butterfly came up in my conversation with Joe or not, but that album came out in 1969 and it was everywhere. As for Hardworking Man, it reads as Motown kinda nudging Power of Zeus into something single length. Easy, palatable hard rocker, maybe a little too easy, floats dangerously close to the butt rock fad of the 2000s, which has been on my brain a little more than usual, thank you, Todd in the Shadows. It's fine, but it's a letdown once you consider the rest of the album showing us what Power of Zeus is capable of. That woke my ass right up. Now that I think of it, this is my 2nd gong in 3 weeks. No, 3rd. Bill Kreutzmann and Mickey Hart both played it on Anthem. Oh my god, 4! If you count Roger Waters, it's the year of the gong, people! And there it is. One of the most sampled drum breaks in rock and roll history. Neo Soul should be eating this one up. It's loose in the pocket with a deep psychedelic soul groove. It's indebted to funk as well. George Clinton and company hit their wacky psychedelic peak this year. Though funk didn't necessarily come up in Power of Zeus's list of influences, Sorcerer does follow that mantra. Free your mind and your ass will follow. So Okay, that was weird. Sorcerer does the exotic Eastern thing that psychedelia loved. It was the time the West was most receptive to Eastern philosophies, visual languages, sounds, and culture. Isis, of course, is the ancient Egyptian mother goddess. The best surviving evidence we have of the ancient Egyptians revolves around their ideas of the afterlife, an idea that comes up over and over and over again on the gospel. Funny enough, cult worship of ancient Egyptian deities does pop up in Greco-Roman cities, so power of Zeus invoking Isis isn't so far off after all. I wish I'd gotten to write more papers about cults. Sorcerer is not immune to studio wizardry. Sudden synths sling us into outer space, and the backwards amen returns, as do bits and bobs of other songs. I feel like I've suddenly done shrooms when so much of this album was acid and weed. Consider my mind freed. I kicks back into that laid-back drum groove with a high-pitched zip of a synth. It's the dark side of psych that I love. It might be nauseating had it been done with a smaller budget or less focus. I'm grateful the Motown resources brought something as positively weird as Sorcerer to fruition. It fades off into the night, or whatever portal Death Trip opened up. If you were to distill the most specific and essential components of my music taste, you would get something like the gospel. It's psychedelic, a little weird at points, dark and heavy. It's proto a lot of things, a niche I love. The only thing that's missing is it exploding into a swath of feedback, but we kinda did that with Sorcerer. The gospel was in a weird spot. It came a little too late for psych, too early for the psych revival, and was too psych for funk. A label like Motown couldn't, or wouldn't, capture the slab of sound that Detroit rock bands consistently delivered. What they did do was bring out Power of Zeus's funk and soul side. I have never heard James Brown in the Five, despite all of Wayne's assertions, but I hear funk in Power of Zeus. They brought out the rhythm section. Bob and Bill were absolutely worth spotlighting. Access to Motown facilities made their ideas happen. Some lyrics are cheesy, some harmonies are dated, but as a whole, the greater part of the gospel lands. A lot of first albums are not afforded those chances, let alone first albums from groups with as potent a sound as Power of Zeus.
Is there anything you wish had been done differently with the gospel LP? Like, is there something you hear and you just go, I wish I could have punched in that one thing?
Not really. I would like to have a little better fidelity with a little more oomph in the record, the way it was recorded. But overall, for what we had to work with, there's really nothing that I would really change. I think everything kind of worked. Like Hard Working Man was something the drummer wrote. And I was pretty happy with most of the leads that I did on that particular album.
Yeah.
For its time and for the writing at the stage that we're in, when you stop thinking about it, 1970, at its time, it was, there's a lot of online reviews of that album, and they really do a nice job with it. In fact, there's one I'm going to look it up and write them down. Literally went through every single song on the album and critiqued that song and the album, and it's spectacular. And you read the comments below, and it's like, if you like Led Zeppelin, you got to get these guys. If you like, Uriah Heep or Deep Purple, you got these. My favorite album. So I'm happy with it. I think it's for where we were at the time. If the band hadn't broke up so soon, I think that we would have came out with a second album, and the writing. That's the first thing we ever wrote. So I think it would have got better as we, matured in our writing. I'm happy for what it was.
I would have loved to see how the guys built on this, if they went more funk or more prog or stripped the Dayglow paint jobs off and went right back to basics. Instead, we have this. A cool artifact of the Detroit scene at its peak. I don't know what was in the water there back then, but it put guitars into men's hands and made them demigods. If the big bands were that good, of course the lesser bands would be that good too. Power of Zeus never really made it past local band, and it's a shame. They had so much potential, but what little of their mythology remains is worth preserving.
This is a music show. What stuff have you been listening to lately?
I listen to everything. I mean, I listen to everything. I've got the satellite radio in the car, and I got all the album cuts, stations, and all the heavy stuff. I still listen to pretty much all the heavy, older rock and roll stuff. And that's the guitar playing and the impact of the music is what gets me, like stuff like Uriah Heep and Jeff Beck and all that kind of stuff. Still listen to it. It's still my favorite.
Do you still play a little guitar?
I tore 2 ligaments in my hand, and it's kind of been painful, but I was playing quite a bit regularly. I've got a nice collection of guitars, and every once in a while I'll go down and I'll play, but not as much as I used to. Every once in a while I'll play for 30-40 minutes. I've got other interests now that takes up a lot of time.
One last question for you.
Sure.
Forgive me if this is silly. Do you remember what happened to this fringe suede thing? I don't know if it's a vest or a top or...
Yeah, it's kind of a top over the top of your head. I think it's still here somewhere. It's on a hanger. I think it's on a hanger somewhere. It was a really good leather. If you ever are you familiar with Luther Allison? Luther Allison is a blues guitar player. When I was at Motown, he was playing at a jazz club, and I went over and I played with him. He's a blues guitarist. He got really famous in England. If you get a chance, because you're in the albums, get Bad News Is Coming, okay? And it's Luther Allison. He has that same top I gave him because I wanted to give him a good image, and he's wearing it on the album shot that Motown took of that. Funny that you would ask about that one piece. In fact, I believe originally my wife bought that for herself. And one day I was going out, I go, let me try wearing that. Well, you ask a lot of good questions, Abigail. You do a really good job. And it's really a pleasure talking to somebody that has the album that I put out 50 some odd years ago and loves the music. It's really an honor just to talk with you.
Thank you. It's an album worth hunting for.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
And I'm glad that the suede thing with the fringe might still exist.
If I find it, I'll send you a picture.
Yes, please do.
Very, very pleased to have met you and talk with you. I'm sure stay in touch and we'll talk sometime again in the future.
Yes, thank you.
And that's the story of the coolest band you have now heard of. My personal favorites off this one are It Couldn't Be Me, In the Night, Death Trip, Uncertain Destination, and Sorcerer. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of the favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist that I update every week, except for this one. And that's it! That is the Gospel According to Zeus. I've heard a lot of no's in my time doing this. And for every no I've received, I've hit 5 more dead ends, with Sagittarius, the flaming circle surrounding the MC5, and then there's the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band. My God, I have been trying to write that episode since January. Nothing! So I want to extend my sincerest thank yous to the people who finally made a Power of Zeus episode happen, to the one who sent me the copy of this album, to Chris for throwing a line out for me, and of course, to Joe for agreeing to tell the story to me and you all. What do you think of this album? What do you think of the Power of Zeus? Had you heard of the Power of Zeus? Comment below. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Mondays, Monday mornings at 11. Not next week though, that is my break week. Right after this, I'm packing the car and going home. But before my next Vinyl Monday, you will be seeing Modern Classics Month Part 3. This is one of the most requested post-1990s albums I've ever had. It's kind of a discovery mission for me, so I'm really excited to get into it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye!